Landore Resources is a Canada-focused explorer and developer. Its portfolio is weighty. It includes the BAM gold deposit, the B47 nickel, copper, cobalt, platinum, palladium gold deposit, the VW, the Lemon, plural, and Carrot Top. And I'm sure I've missed a few others. Well, for years, the company was led by Bill Humphries. He stepped down at the latest AGM, and I'm delighted to be joined by the new chief executive, Claude Lemasson. So, Claude, what convinced you to take on the job at Landore?
Well, actually, it's been a bit of a three-prong approach. When I was first approached to look at the company and potentially take over, be a candidate and take over, I looked at what they provided for information, which was really like a job description, if you want. And my first instinct was that this could be my resume, if you want. So, everything that was in the job description was exactly what I did in my career. So over 32 years. So that was the first thing that got me. The second thing is at the corporate level. I obviously did a review of the company and at a high level the assets, and just trying to understand the structure of the company and how this would all work. I also did interviews with some of the senior executives and the directors. And by the time I was done, I was convinced that, this was a good corporation. And then the people involved also were very solid. So that was, the second aspect that was important to me. The third one is a technical side. I come from a technical background as an engineer. So for me, it was important to do a deep dive into the data, the drilling data, the information, the resource, and the preliminary economic assessment, which I did review in detail. And after doing that full review, I was satisfied that from a mining technical aspect, that this was a very solid. The work that had been done was very solid, and the resource at BAM particularly was a very good resource, but it did need some help to move forward. So I thought it was an excellent fit for me.
Okay, so your career credentials tick. In terms of the technicals, you see a good, solid portfolio. However, what do you see that the markets don't, because the share price hasn't done so well?
Yeah, I think the current events, meaning the previous CEO Bill retiring and me taking over with a set of new eyes and a new strategy. Everything I just talked about is what I see. I see that there's something very solid there, but it does need to be moved forward in a more strategic approach, and I'm willing to do that. Does that mean moving forward that we are going to raise money? Obviously, we are. Are we going to drill some more? Obviously, we are. And are we also going to move towards resource, a new revised resource, if you want to call it, eventually, and pre-feasibility study and feasibility study? So essentially moving towards development. So I do see all those things. This has all the elements that you want. And as long as we, come up with the right strategy, which is I'm working on right now, obviously, then I think the market will be pleased to see progress, particularly on the main asset, on the BAM gold project.
But it's where you're going to raise that money, because you're French born, you're Canadian domiciled, and that kind of makes sense because Landore has Canadian assets. So do you see the company concentrating funding efforts in Canada and perhaps a listing on the TSX?
Yes, absolutely. So what we are currently working on is a TSX V listing, which is TSX Venture, in Toronto. The application is already in, and we have expectations that that will come through sometime in the next month and a half to 2 months. With that in hand, once we're listed in Canada, then obviously we're able to attract the many Canadian investors that invest in mining, and I'm talking, funds as well as retail investors, as well as individuals. So that will be very attractive. I think we will see an influx of Canadian investors into the story, because currently most Canadian investors are not interested because it's AIM listed and it's too complicated. So but with a TSXV, it'll be a difference. The other thing that I see, though, is the current investors, which I know many are from the UK and Europe, I'm going to say in general, I think will also, be pleased with the progress and may want to continue to be shareholders and contribute into financing as well. So definitely when we do financing next, it'll be ultimately the strategies that it will be, Canadian based or Toronto based, I'm going to call it. And then we'll be able to raise money right here in Canada for a project right in Ontario.
So whilst AIM might be complicated, Landore's story isn't complicated because it has defined resources in both gold and nickel. So what are your thoughts on these two resources, and how would you plan to advance them?
Yeah, so for me and with the discussions that I've had, there's no question that, the focus moving forward should be the BAM Gold project. It is by far the most advanced. With a little bit more drilling, I believe we can improve the resource, increase the resource, potentially influence the grade, make it a little better. And from that perspective, I think BAM needs to be the focus. Now, with the nickel asset right next door to BAM, literally they're side by side, I believe that also could be fairly important, but only after we get BAM kind of rolling, if you want. So I'm certainly initially not going to focus on the nickel asset, but it's probably priority number 2. Okay. Now you mentioned Limon, which is not too far from BAM as well, which is gold on the same trend. So Limon would also be kind of retained and on hold temporarily, but eventually as a priority. But right now, for sure, it's all eyes on BAM.
So I'll be blunt. Would you want to put BAM into production?
Yes. Everything that we are going to do is going to be able to move to a new resource. So do the drilling, move to a new resource, move through the appropriate studies, pre-feas and feasibility study, and including more advanced environmental studies, and relationships, continuing the excellent relationships with the indigenous communities. And then, from that point on, we would go into a development mode, full development, which means we would actually, go into construction with a plan to build and eventually come into production. So, when I look at this kind of asset, we actually lay out the plan for, the next few years. Obviously, we focus on the near term or the short term, if you want, but it's really, there is a long-term plan with a long-term goal. So the idea is to do everything in place to be able to move towards development and production.
So I'm quite sure that BAM was included in the strategic review, which was conducted last year. However, that strategic review outwardly to shareholders appeared to be inconclusive and a complete waste of time. Have you managed to extrapolate any positives from the review?
I'm going to say yes. So I looked at what was done. I had discussions on that review. I would say to me it was not necessarily a waste of time because it kind of, I think, reset the board and the executives on really what matters. And I think the biggest conclusion, the way I read it and understand it and spoke to people about, was that BAM should be the focus and should be moved forward. So to me that was, maybe that wasn't clear in the past because there was so many assets, as you mentioned earlier, and there was focus on one asset for maybe a year or two, then focus on another asset a year or two, and without really advancing the main asset, which is clearly BAM. So I think that result kind of reset the board and the executive to say, okay, maybe we should really go in that direction. And obviously part of that was ultimately a change, which is a new CEO.
Okay, so BAM is the focus now. Historically, Landore has been selling non-core assets. The portfolio is still stuffed. So do you see that the selling of non-core assets will continue even as a funding option?
Yes, and that's very key because I know you mentioned, where are we going to raise money and what is it going to be in the UK? Is it going to be in Canada? It's actually, potentially going to be both, but to minimize dilution for the current shareholders, it's very important that we either do options on some of the non-core assets, or and because that's often a first step towards maybe a sale or an outright sale. So I'm even currently reviewing some of the non-core with the intent of having interested parties talk to us, and we are certainly willing to either option or sell and bring that money into Landore to be able to spend that money on BAM. So absolutely, the portfolio to me is I know the portfolio was built over many years and it's quite spread out. We've already disposed of some of the assets. We have options, important options on other assets. That effort is definitely going to continue on the side to be able to bring as much money as we can into the company to then be able to focus on BAM and do the drilling, for example, which is not cheap, and we have to do important drilling on BAM.
But what are your immediate plans to help lift the share price? What can be done now? Because options, selling, drilling, it's not going to happen next week.
100%. So in the short term, really our focus is, well, the first step really was I guess bringing me in, step one. We did do a small financing and right before I joined, and that was necessary to make sure we were we were going to be able to carry on for the next 3-4 months. So we did that. And I know that the share price dropped accordingly, and that happens every time you do financing, but that's the reality. Coming up with the new strategy is very key. So I'm currently working very seriously on that, very much along the lines of what I just stated, but we're with more detail to it, and obviously defining exactly the targets for BAM for the drilling coming up. The cost that we're going to allocate to that effort. So all of those things are going to be presented and announced as soon as I'm ready to do so. When when I've concluded my strategic plan and having it approved by the board, and then from that is announcing that. So that's really one very important part of what's going on, in the next month, I'm going to say to 2 months. The other one is this TSXV listing, because if as within roughly the same timing, in a month and a half to 2 months, that should be in place. I mean, that'll change many things as well. And we will be able to present to not only the current European investor and UK and European investors, but to the potentially new potential Canadian investors, really the way forward, the new plan. So to me, that is in the short term is key, tied to what we just talked about before, tied to potentially unloading or optioning or selling some of the non-core assets all together. Because as I think investors see that that's happening, that's going to give them comfort that maybe when we go for the next financing, it won't be as big as we normally would have to do. And, you know, there's all those aspects that are in play at the same time. So to me, that's the way forward. That's the way I think we're going to go from, you know, where the share price is, you know, today to ideally up is the idea.
Okay, I'm just a little bit worried, Claude. Should I be worried? You just said there that just before you took up your appointment that the company had a raise to keep things going. Is the company's finances, are the company's finances at a critical level? Should shareholders be thinking, oh my goodness, this sounds quite dire?
No, and I didn't mean it that way. The difference is the company could go on with the money that was in the bank. There's a significant amount of money in the bank, significant to operate normal and for many months to come. The difference is the raise that was done is to be able to support all the new efforts that are going to happen and are happening very quickly. So, you know, the company is solid and can operate at a certain level, but because I was coming in, we want to operate at a bit of a higher level to really move things forward. And that money was to secure that new effort.
Okay, you've only been in the job for just over a week now. Do you have any messages for the loyal Landore shareholders, and is there a message that you want to put out to potential new investors?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, many of the things that I just said in the interview, but you know, to me, the UK investors are very important. They've been there for a long time, very supportive. I think the one of the messages is you know, we are going to communicate extensively, whether it's through press releases or a new presentation. Eventually, potentially put in place a new website or a revamped website, we're going to call it. You know, all those things are happening. I am very responsive in communication. I've been approached by 3-4 shareholders and I've responded to them directly. So all those things are happening. And then with all the changes, I think for the potentially new investors, particularly the ones from Canada, they'll see a big change. By the time we get our listing, they'll see all these other things in place with the new strategy, new presentation. They'll be able to better understand. And I will be also spending time on the road, you know, essentially doing investor relations and marketing of Landore and of the BAM Gold project.
Wonderful. And music to my ears, a revamped website, a refreshed shop window for Landore. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you very much for your time, Claude Lemasson, the Chief Executive of Landore Resources. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.